Well, in November, financial services group Transaction Capital reported it had 500 million rand in a war chest marked for acquisitions as its strategy gains momentum. In true acquisitive mode, the company has a planned 2 billion rand bond issue into Zebra Cab's expansion with the recent acquisition of Shark, Marnus Broodryck's business. We ask if this financial group is dabbling in the data space as well. This is the Moneymakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Tonight, I'm joined by David Hurwitz, who is the Chief Executive of Transaction Capital, to discuss why market commentators think that Transaction Capital is a stock worth watching in 2017. He's only going to tell us the good stories. He's also gone aboard a business in Australia. You know what they say about Australia? Okay, well, we've got to narrow it down a bit. South African companies going into Australia go there. Australians welcome South African companies with open arms and then proceed to bend them over a barrel and do awful things to them.
I've heard that before, Bruce. I have heard that.
What have you bought in Australia?
So we bought, Transaction Capital's got two divisions, the taxi division that you've already mentioned, and then something called Transaction Capital Risk Services. The
debt collection.
The largest part, we like to call it recoveries.
Okay.
But yes, debt collection,
right.
Data and technology business, and we have bought a business in Australia that does just that.
Now, why? Because this is, you're going from a fundamentally different economy into the Australian environment. One of the biggest mistakes South African executives make is thinking there are lots of South Africans there, it'll be the same, and it never is. You look at Westpac, you look at Pick n Pay, you look at the aches and pains of just so many South African companies that have been bloodied and bruised over 2-3 decades.
Yeah, so as you correctly say, we had a war chest that we wanted to spend. We were very conservative. It took us more than 2 years to find our first acquisition, which was this Australian business. We didn't pick a business in Australia. We scoured the world to find what we thought was the right business.
And the best thing you could find was in Australia?
The right one that we could find was in Australia for various reasons, from a risk perspective. And effectively what we're doing there is the business in Australia is very similar to our business, so it's within our narrow market, or our vertical as we would call it. Number two, it's a fantastic business. It really operates very well. And then the third thing is that we believe we can enhance that business. We don't think we can arrive in Australia and know more than them. The business is a 25-year-old business. The CEO remains in the business. The two founders remain in the business. And we will help them to develop that business into something greater. Right now what they do is they collect as an agent, contingency type of work. Our business in South Africa does both contingency work and we buy books for our own account, and we'll convert that business into that.
South Africa's got a wonderful problem as far as you're concerned, and that is we've got consumers who've got too much debt and they struggle to pay it back. That is manna from heaven for your business.
Well, it is and it isn't. We typically
That's what you're based on. You're based on people's misery.
Yes, but one thing is that when disposable income is low, it's harder for us to collect. So there's lots more work, and we find from our clients are the banks, the credit retailers, the telcos, the insurance companies, anybody who's collecting from the consumer is our client. So there's a lot more work for us because, as you say, lots of non-performing debt in the country, 24 million credit active South Africans and about 9.8 million of those are delinquent. So lots of work for us to do, but at the end of the day they don't have money. So when disposable income is low, it's harder for them to pay. So typically in this environment we buy lots of books because there are lots of books around.
And it makes them cheap because nobody else can collect them.
It makes them cheap, but you only really make the bet. Well, we're defensive. We make good money in this environment, but we make better money when the consumer has disposable income and he can catch up on his debts. So we're actually hoping for the consumer credit environment to improve.
Now, for a South African sitting here looking at Australia and saying, but they don't have the same debt issues we do. How attractive a business can it be in Australia if we've got a much more homogenous society, far higher levels of employment, and theoretically people who behave a lot better, or are they just as delinquent as we are when it comes to paying our debt?
So household debt to income in South Africa sits at about 75 to 76%. That's where it's been, I guess, for the last 4 or 5 years. In Australia, it's sitting at about 170%. So the Australian consumer is over-leveraged, and typically they leverage against their properties. Property prices haven't gone up as they have in the past. Then the positives are that there's high levels of contactability, so you can find the Australian consumer. In South Africa, the prevalence of prepaid SIM cards in the cell phone space makes it difficult to contact people. Number two, there's a high level of employment, which is stated, so people, when they are found, do want to repay, and there's a high moral obligation to repay. So the Australian business case actually makes really good sense. And interestingly enough, in Australia, where we collect very much for the banks, telcos and retailers, they collect a lot for government, so outstanding taxes and those type of things, as well as then for utilities, Australia, gas, those type of things. So
is this a foothold in Australia? Is this the beginning of great things? Is Australia now part of a strategy? Because you didn't have Australia as your target, you had a business as your target, and the business fitted what you were looking for. It just happens to be on Australia. It could be a beachhead.
So yes, so the business, that's exactly right. We found the business. We then had the secondary decision was, well, do we go into Australia? One of the positives I've mentioned a whole lot, like high contactability, high levels of employment, high household debt to income. But one of the other positives for Australia was that that market is relatively fragmented. So we do think that there will be some acquisitive opportunities, and we are applying our minds to that.
Well, what's the competitive environment like? Because one of the businesses that has actually done quite well, I think, in Australia was Outsurance. They went into an already very, very saturated insurance market, direct insurance market. 90% of insurance in Australia, I think, is sold online and and via telephone, and that's what they do. And they've managed to grab a little piece of that pie, which is enough to give a great return, which makes the effort worthwhile.
So, I mean, the environment there is, as I said, it is fragmented. There are 3 large listed players in the space. As I said, we only participate in the contingency collection space, which is actually not that competitive at all. And we believe there's nice growth that we can have in that area. And we collect, as I said, for government and utilities, and interestingly enough, in the insurance space as well. So there's fantastic organic growth opportunity there. Then the other opportunity is to move into the book buying space, which is more competitive. But we'll be selective, and again, as you point out, which is correct, with a small piece of that market, we can make significant. It can make our needle move in this environment.
Late last year, you said you had 500 million rand to spend on acquisitions. This cost you 356, I think, million rand. Was that part of the 500?
That was. So where we.
So you got nothing left, really, because there's another potential 10 million Australian dollars.
That gets us to the 500.
So that gets you.
We have 3. The short answer is we have about 300 left.
Okay.
We're seeing some nice opportunities. And,
here or elsewhere?
Both, quite frankly, both. And not so much in recoveries in South Africa, because we are the largest player in this side, and there aren't any other players of real scale that we could acquire. So we've seen some nice opportunities offshore, some nice opportunities in some of our other verticals locally, and we do have 300
You
left.
just switched into a language I don't understand.
Vertical.
Yes, you said in our verticals. What are our verticals?
So I mean, if you look at transaction capitals, we have 2 divisions. Maybe that's a better word.
So you see more opportunity in the taxi business than you do
in our risk, not so much in the taxi. In our risk services division, we have a few verticals.
You have verticals in the risk services.
So one
vertical.
is recoveries. Okay. For example, one would be value-added services. One would be payment services, and then the other is IT and data.
The oddest place I've ever been into is into your call centre on a day where lots of collections were happening, and it was calm. Nobody was shouting. There was no screaming. There was no threatening. Nobody was angry. It was quite unsettling, actually. Has the mood, this was about 3 or 4 years ago, has the mood in collections changed? Because my sense is, with 27 point something unemployment, with an economy under pressure, hopefully recovering this year, that environment might become a little easier.
So, I mean, our call centres are designed to be calm. I mean, the first myth that we have to dispel is, the myth of, baseball bats. So no one, there are no visitations. There are no visitations at all. Our business is a data and technology business. From a data perspective, we've got something we call the Master Data Universe. It is a database of 9.2 million delinquent South Africans. I quoted a stat earlier that said there are 9.7 or 9.8 million delinquent South Africans in total. So we've got about 94% coverage, and this data is analysed in our technology system and then pumped into the call centre. So so it is a very controlled environment, very scripted, and it's not yes, there's conflict for every agent every day, because they're asking people to do things they don't want to do, which is pay back money that they owe. But it's all very controlled.
There's a guy who could have used your services. Well, I've forgotten his name, but he wasn't paying back money. They could have used your guy's call centre. He would have paid the money sooner. That would have been a good test for the model. If I gave you my ID number, what would you be able to find out about?
So the 2 most important pieces of data will be, number 1, propensity to repay. So we'll see how much debt you have, who you are paying, who you aren't
But how
paying.
will you see how much debt I have? Do you have access to absolutely every bank database, every single short-term lender database, every single clothing retailer database?
No. So I mean, the main piece of data that we have, which is proprietary to us, is books that we've bought. So we wouldn't have every piece of debt that you owe, but if you're delinquent, chances are, as I said, we've got 9.2 million records on our database, so we've got a 94% chance that if you are delinquent, you'll be on our database. We would have bought your debt from somewhere, and we'll see if you are or aren't able to pay that back. Then, of course, we have public databases, deeds offices, Experian, ITC, etc., and we enrich that data with public data as well. So that will give us a good feel for your propensity to repay.
Me playing this game before and having handed in some, given over my ID number to a group like yours, I found the data massively out of date. There's stuff that is 10 and 12 years old where a property you might have owned 12 years ago is still registered on this database in your name, and actually it's no longer there. Doesn't strike me as a perfect science.
So it isn't a perfect science, but we like to make it as perfect as we can, and we've invested heavily into data.
But that's the competitive advantage.
That is. So the competitive advantage is two things. Number one, scale, because the more you collect, and the more information that's coming through your collection system, this database can get updated live. So when we phone you, if we contact you, we could say, we've only got a cell phone number for you, can you perhaps give us a work number? Or can you give us an email address?
No, go away, leave me alone.
Well, there is a moral obligation to repay your debts, Bruce, as you might know.
No, but
so scale helps us.
There's a moral and a legal obligation. Are we getting better or worse at it?
Are the South African consumers getting better or worse at it? Mm-hmm. Based on the environment, I would say they're getting worse at it. I mean, we are seeing more.
Is it malicious or an environmental issue?
No, I think it's an environmental issue.
People generally want to be as squeaky clean as possible so they can get the next hit from a loan or whatever the case might be. People
want to be in the credit cycle at the end of the day, and that's why we see old debts being repaid. So, if you want to get another account at another retailer, you need to clear up your card. And that's where we come in. So we always talk about being able to keep the balance sheets of our clients, the banks and the retailers, clean, so that they are able to advance credit again. If that debt can't get cleared, banks have greater write-off, and hence cost of credit to the population increases.
David Hurwitz, let's leave it there. Thank you very much for coming in today. Chief Executive of Transaction Capital, David Hurwitz. Other issues to discuss and to dissect. South Africa in a tough space, but guys like David Hurwitz are able to make hay even when the sun doesn't shine. For now, though, have a very good evening. Good night.